Everyone knows Medusa could turn men to stone. Far fewer people remember that she had two sisters. Their names were Stheno and Euryale. They were older than Medusa. They were more terrifying than Medusa. And in most Greek tradition, they could not be killed. So why was Medusa the only mortal Gorgon? Was she weaker than the others? Or did Greek myth need one sister to die so the whole story could work? To answer that, we have to look past the famous severed head and recover the forgotten family standing behind it. The sister everyone remembers. Today, when most people hear the word Gorgon, they usually think of Medusa alone. That is understandable. She is the sister Perseus kills. Her head becomes a weapon. Her face appears on shields, temples, and protective images. And later writers gave her a personal backstory dramatic enough to overshadow everyone around her. But in the older mythic tradition, Medusa is not an isolated monster. She belongs to a trio. Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa form a single terrifying family. And once you put them back together, the question changes. The real mystery is not just what Medusa was. It is why Greek myth made one sister mortal while the other two remained deathless. That difference is the key to the entire story. Medusa's mortality makes the heroic quest possible. It makes her death meaningful. And it makes the surviving sisters tragic, because when Perseus escapes, he leaves behind not only terror, but grief. If you enjoy ancient myths, hidden details, and discovering what the ancient sources actually say, subscribe to Gods and Heroes Unveiled. We uncover another side of the Greek world in every video. Before Medusa was the main Gorgon. One of the strangest things about the Gorgon story is that the earliest Greek tradition does not always begin with three named sisters. In Homer, we often meet something more general and more frightening. The Gorgon as a single image of horror. A Gorgon head appears on Athena's aegis, and in the underworld, a hero fears that Persephone may send up the head of the Gorgon to terrify him. That matters because it shows that the Gorgon begins as a symbol of overwhelming dread before later tradition turns the symbol into a family. The face itself is enough. Staring eyes, serpent hair, monstrous features, and the power to stop courage in its tracks. In that stage of the tradition, the emphasis is not yet on Medusa's biography. It is on the Gorgon as pure terror. By the time we reach Hesiod, however, the picture sharpens. The terror now has a genealogy. The Gorgon is no longer just an image on a shield or a nightmare from below. She is one of three sisters, born into a larger family of ancient sea powers at the edge of the world. The three daughters of Phorcys and Ceto. In Hesiod's Theogony, the Gorgons are daughters of Phorcys and Ceto, primeval sea beings associated with dangerous, ancient, and uncanny life beyond the familiar human world. Their home lies far to the west, near the borders of night, where Greek imagination often placed beings older and stranger than ordinary mortals. There, Hesiod names them clearly: Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa. He does not present Medusa as the whole story. He presents a set of sisters. That alone should change how we picture the myth. Medusa is the most famous one now, but in the genealogy, she arrives as part of a group, not as a solitary exception. The names of the sisters help deepen the atmosphere. Stheno suggests force or might. Euryale suggests wide roaming or far-springing power. Medusa suggests a guardian or protectress. Even before later storytellers add details, the family already feels ancient and symbolic. They are not random monsters. They are sea-born daughters from a mythic frontier where the world shades into the inhuman. Why Medusa alone could die? Hesiod gives the answer in one of the most important lines in the whole tradition. Stheno and Euryale are immortal and ageless. Medusa is mortal. That is the basic fact. Greek myth does not hide it, and it does not treat all three sisters as identical. Medusa stands apart because she belongs partly to the world of death, while the others do not. That difference is tied immediately to what happens next. Hesiod says Poseidon lay with Medusa in a soft meadow among spring flowers. Later, when Perseus cuts off her head, Pegasus and Chrysaor spring from her neck. In other words, Medusa's mortality is not an afterthought. It is what allows a chain of extraordinary events to happen: union, death, and miraculous birth. If all three sisters were fully deathless, Perseus could not complete his quest in the form Greek myth remembers. The severed head would never become Athena's trophy. Pegasus would not be born from the wound, and Medusa would not stand at the crossing point between immortal terror and mortal fate. Her death is not there because she is the least interesting sister. It is there because the story depends on one Gorgon being killable. What made Stheno and Euryale different? Stheno and Euryale do not receive the same later fame as Medusa, but that does not make them minor. Their immortality gives the Gorgon story its scale. Medusa can be slain, but the world that produced her cannot be finished off so easily. Two elder sisters remain behind, older powers still undefeated at the edge of the earth. Ancient art and later retellings often keep the three sisters visually similar: winged bodies, serpentine hair, glaring eyes, and monstrous force. Yet tradition sometimes lets one emotional detail shine through. After Perseus kills Medusa, it is Euryale whose cry becomes especially memorable in later poetic imagination. That detail matters because it reminds us that the Gorgons are not just obstacles. They are kin. This is another reason Medusa's mortality matters. If she is the one vulnerable sister inside an otherwise deathless pair, then her death does not simply remove a monster. It breaks a family pattern. Stheno and Euryale become the surviving witnesses of something that could happen only once. How Perseus used the difference. Perseus does not march into the Gorgons' land and defeat three equal enemies in open combat. He survives because the myth is structured around asymmetry. He receives help, equipment, and instructions precisely because facing the sisters directly would be impossible. Athena gives guidance. Divine gifts help him approach, and his target is Medusa, not the immortal pair beside her. That is why the famous reflective shield matters so much. Perseus must avoid the deadly face while striking only the one sister who can actually die. In many versions, the Gorgons are asleep when he attacks. He severs Medusa's head, and then the world erupts. Pegasus and Chrysaor appear. The surviving sisters wake. The hunt begins. Now the difference between mortal and immortal becomes urgent. Perseus is not staying to test himself against Stheno and Euryale. He escapes. The immortal sisters pursue him in fury, but divine aid, speed, and concealment save him. The myth is not telling us that he was stronger than all three Gorgons. It is telling us that he succeeded because he understood the one weakness the story allowed. How the story changed over time. So why do so many modern retellings make Medusa feel like the only Gorgon who matters? Part of the answer is that later authors, especially in the Roman world, became fascinated by her as an individual. The best-known example is Ovid, who turns Medusa into a beautiful maiden transformed after Poseidon's assault in Athena's temple. That version has been enormously influential, but it is not the oldest layer of the myth. In earlier Greek tradition, Medusa is already one of the Gorgons. The later transformation story gives her a personal tragedy that modern audiences understandably remember, yet it also pushes Stheno and Euryale deeper into the background. Once Medusa becomes the focus of beauty lost, injustice suffered, and revenge embodied, the sisters begin to look like supporting figures instead of equal parts of the old horror. That shift changes the emotional center of the myth. The older story asks why one Gorgon is mortal inside a monstrous family. The later story asks what happened to Medusa as a woman. Both are powerful, but they are not the same question. And if we forget that difference, we lose the strange elegance of the earlier design. Why the Gorgon sisters still matter? The Gorgon sisters matter because together they show how Greek myth often works. A familiar monster turns out to belong to a larger cosmic family. A famous individual stands out because of one decisive difference. And a heroic victory becomes meaningful only when we see the immortal background that makes the victory rare. Medusa is memorable not because the others are unimportant, but because her mortality makes her the point where a hero can wound a world otherwise beyond him. Stheno and Euryale also keep the myth from becoming too simple. If Medusa were the only Gorgon, the story would end with her death. But because two immortal sisters survive, terror continues. The edge of the world remains haunted, and Medusa's death becomes something more than a clean triumph. It becomes a singular breach in a family that still exists beyond the reach of ordinary men. Which part of the story fascinates you most? Medusa's mortality, Euryale's grief, or the older three-sister tradition itself? Tell us in the comments. And if you want to continue the story with the hero who faced them, watch our video on how Perseus killed Medusa without looking at her next.